Personality Neuroscience. Part 1. April 17, 2019. The purpose today is to introduce you to the functioning of what is called an individual. Not so much for you to recognize yourself through what I am going to say, but rather to understand the articulation of the different layers of the human being at the level of its functioning, not physiological, even if it is part of physiology, but at all levels. A human being is an assembly, at the level of his personality, of several components. These components are observed in 5 layers. These layers range from the most archaic level to the most differentiated level, to the level of what is called cognition or behavior. The first thing that appears is obviously the deepest level, the organization of the 3 brains. In neuroscience, we know very well that we are made up of 3 brains. The first brain, called the archaic or reptilian brain, which corresponds anatomically to the deepest layers of the brain, i.e. the pituitary gland, hypothalamus, epiphysis and all the automatic structures located in the brain stem. Breathing, heartbeat, all the so-called central regulations, i.e. the regulation of hunger, thirst, sleep, temperature regulation, which does not require cognition, human consciousness, because they are automatic processes. Walking, for example, is an automatic process that is learned at an average age of 1 year. Once it's integrated, you don't have to think about it anymore. So, remember, 5 layers. I'll show you the pictures after. The first layer, therefore, is the anatomical constitution of these 3 brains. First brain, the deepest, is the reptilian brain, and all the central nuclei that are around the thalamus, where there are the famous lateral ventricles that you have worked with your hands on either side of the head, okay. However, these 3 brains work in a rather special way. We all have a brain, among the 3, that is in the spotlight. Then we all have a second brain that is different, maybe the reptilian or something else, that is the supporting brain, that is, it will cooperate with the brain that is at the front of the stage, and you have a third brain, the third component. I have not yet defined the other 2, that is in opposition to it, always. After the reptilian brain, you have a structure, and there too, at the phylogenetic level, at the creative level, in the so-called evolution, these brains are supposed to have appeared successively in time through paleogenesis. After the reptilian brain, you have what is called the limit brain or intermediate brain, which is supposed to make the link between the automatic reptilian brain and what is called cognition, which is related to grey matter, okay. This brain says limbic, it is the brain of emotions, the emotional brain. And the third brain, of course, is the neocortex, the most recent brain structure, the grey matter. And that these 3 brains are under the dictatorship inscribed in anatomy, but also in heredity, we will see how by the activity of an essential neuromediator that are. For the reptilian brain, serotonin. For the so-called limbal system it is called adrenaline and norepinephrine, so do not retain these chemical names, I give you them, but it is especially that it induces behaviors. For cognition, i.e. the neocortex, it is dopamine, the mind-up dope. And all 3 brains are immersed in a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is responsible for muscle movement. Because you know that in the muscles, you have the nerve coming in, which releases the acetylcholine vesicles, which trigger muscle contraction. In the brain too, it's bathed in this acetylcholine bath. Each neurotransmitter, and therefore each brain, creates what are called primary behaviors, which are always the same in every human being. So, at this level, the only specificity, the only difference that exists between human beings, and there, too, it has been demonstrated, is heredity. It is transgenerational, and it is the life experience you lead between 0 and 7 years old, whether through teaching, education, emotional and family foods, which will therefore dictate all your behaviors in adulthood, absolutely all your behaviors. These behaviors have very specific names. In the reptilian brain, the archaic brain, we saw that it was serotonin, induces the primary behavior, which was called the avoidance of suffering, by the one who created this model that I preferred to call the attitude towards the test, whatever the test. Elaborate work has taught us that when faced with an ordeal, illness, on the scene of life or otherwise, when faced with an ordeal, when faced with an event, you have only three choices. Escape, first survival reflex, struggle, second survival reflex or astonishment, that is, like the ostrich, you put your head in the sand, what is called denial. The second primary behavior is related to adrenaline and norepinephrine and induces the behavior that is called the need for reward. Overall, it is the level of human sociality and interaction with other people. The reptilian brain, and I have charts for that, I'll show you, don't bother to write it down, you'll get the files. The reptilian brain is, of course, linked to the acquisition of automatic processes, survival and defense strategies, and it is at this level that the myth of individuality is located, that is, to believe that one is an individual. Today, we know, pertinently, with chemical means, how to break this dream of individuality. We have talked about the entheogens, the most important of which is Salvia divinorum, divine as sage, salvinarin. It is the molecule. Since we know very well chemically, we can totally eliminate the individuality of the individual. We can also do it with magnetic fields, something that Canadians and Australians do. The third brain, the neocortex, as we have seen, is dopamine. It is linked to what is called at the behavioral level in search of novelty. The newborn is immersed in a dopamine bath that will be responsible for all his learning and all his primary behaviors in relation to this, i.e., the search for novelty. Already, you see, a very simple thing in life, you have the healers and you have the creative ones. Creative people are under the influence of what is called intuition, no matter what, but it is the neocortex. It is the whole capacity to project oneself into the future, to give meaning, to dream, to create. The search for novelty is also that taking of risks, and you can well imagine that most often there is an opposition, even if sometimes it can be associated between the neocortex, which is the most superficial layer, the grey matter, and this behavior that we have called the search for novelty, which will be totally the opposite and in apparent contradiction, with what? With the attitude towards the test or the avoidance of the test. This attitude to the challenge, the reptilian brain, is the neocortical, the one who goes forward, the one who thinks is much less present, of course, than in the conservative, the one who has established rules, certainties, reproducibility. We have also made a table that shows all the behavioral characteristics of the reptilian brain, the limbic brain, which is linked to sociality, the need for reward, the need for recognition, the need for sociality, the limbic, and the neocortex, which is linked to the future, to projection. The reptilian brain functions by habit, and in the past, it is all the behavioral injunctions resulting from heredity. It is written in DNA and learning, that is, everything you have encountered between the time of your conception and up to 7 years. This is how what is called individuality and self-representation of oneself in the world is built and constructed, that is, finding one's place in the world. There is a brain that is most often intermediate. Moreover, it bears its name, mesolimbic or limbal system, that is the intermediary between the reptilian, that is to say, individuality, and the neocortex, the grey matter where the so-called stars are located, where everything that is called cognition is located, not cognition. And the two brains, of course, the search for novelty means that you are not afraid of the challenge, you're at the limit. If you're in search of novelty, very strong, you're the daredevil, you're the hero, you go for it, you are not held back by your attitude towards the challenge, so there, you are not in flight, you're in the elaborate fight, that is, in the struggle, in opposition. The limbic makes the link, and in 95% of the cases, we see that you are either what is said between us in neuroscientific language, a reptilian, that is, someone who is marked by habits, someone who refuses novelty, someone who refuses the unknown, who needs a framework, need references, they are fearful, they are people who are always afraid of the dark, afraid of emptiness, afraid of cats, afraid of animals. These are marked by habits, they are marked by their memories, they are marked by their learning of life in early childhood, and they suffer, of course, since they do everything to avoid suffering. They are in defense strategies, in avoidance strategies. These will never be free, in quotation marks. Of course, everyone is free, we're changing. The limbic is the effective, it is the one who always reacts in the moment to what the other sends him as a signal, or society is the one who can reach, who depends on the other, who lacks autonomy. It is the sensitive, it is the hyper-emotional. The neocortical is the hero, it is the one who is not afraid of the challenge, it is the one who always goes forward, it is the one who will always have ideas, who is ready to break all the rhythms of reproduction and habits, whether in the company or in his life. So we have neocortical, we have reptilians as we say, and we have mesolimbican. Of course, depending on the level of activity, because we can determine a normal, an increase or an excess, the same, we can determine a decrease or really a deficiency for a given behavior or a given neurotransmitter. It has been done, we have taken the blood samples and the measurements have been done, and we know that it works like that. Those who are interested in bureaucracy, this is not a university course, it is Dr. Robert Cloninger, an American who developed this understanding and who has perfectly associated himself with what are now called cognitive and behavioral therapies, that come to us from the United States and Anglo-Saxon countries, and that were developed by, first of all, Professor AYOUN, an American, and that were validated by another American named Jeffrey Young, not J-U-N-G, but Y-O-U-N-G, who developed all the cognitive and behavioral therapies that came from that. There are laws of brain functioning. There is one, for example, that I wanted to give, which is what we call, that has been named, it comes back to me, I forgot, it will come back, don't worry. So, I'm now talking about my three brains again. There is a chemical behavioral articulation between these three brains that will be responsible for what is called your behavior in general in all the circumstances of your life. Beyond being a reptilian, neocortical or mesolimbic, 95% of people are either neocortical or reptilian, the mesolimbic being most often the supporting brain. Sister. Does it mix anyway? No. These three brains, do they mix anyway? Yes, that's what we're going to see now. The activation and activity of these three neurotransmitters and these three primary behaviors, as well as a fourth term, which is the fourth term, which is not a brain, but the bath in which these brains bathe, called acetylcholine, which is not responsible for a behavior, but for what is called biophysical stability. When you mix these four elements with their measure each time, you end up with a classification into 81 typologies. Obviously, it is not a question of developing it today, it takes weeks, but it is what we call, for example, as I told you, the heroic pusher, the one who has the neocortical, who is immersed in dopamine, who always goes forward, who rushes into the heat, or, on the contrary, I told you, the one who is conservative, who refuses new things, who is completely seated in certainty, who is afraid that one will disturb his habits, because he is afraid. alchemy, finally, the pure chemistry of these three behaviors and four stabilities, or if you prefer, these four neurotransmitters, Jeffrey, Young and Aaron Beck, as well as Dr. Cloninger, have determined 81 types of temperament. It's just 3 times 3, times 3, times 3, as I told you. He gave names, so you have the hypochondriac, you have the heroic climber, you have the emotional where everything will be based on the emotional transaction. What is interesting is that the personality is, of course, composed of temperaments and that according to your temperament which, I remind you, is hereditary and linked to learning between the ages of 0 and 7, you will be subject to behavioral injunctions that are sometimes distorted. Example. The Abandonment Syndrome, which is so well known, which can start totally, you're in your crib, you cry for food, no one comes, you feel abandoned. And for some, because of the constitution of DNA, it will be printed in the brain, it will create neural networks and you will be subjected to fear all your life, and you will be a conservative or reptilian, you will hate change, you will hate what pushes you. On the other hand, the neocortical person, on the other hand, in relation to the attitude towards the test, rushes into the test, does not see the test, does not care, on the contrary, is stimulated by the test, is the heroic climber, is the competitive intuitive. So I'm not going to mention the 81 behaviors, there are a lot of behaviors. So you are subject to that and you can do nothing about it. Remember, everything you are going to oppose, even through understanding, through psychology, will become stronger. However, we are all in one of these mechanisms of functioning that are part of the personality, which is called temperament. So I'm waiting to have the paintings to show you them, if we ever have them. Of course, the reptilian brain corresponds to the past, of course, the neocortex corresponds to the future and the limbic system corresponds to the present. That is why the emotions that normally correspond to the present prevent you, somewhere, from getting rid, as a brain, of connections between the reptilian brain and the cortical brain, from being free. This is the first layer, this deepest layer, the nucleus, if you will, in terms of computing, it is the operating system of your computer. We know very well that we cannot change it, because these are neural networks that are created between birth and 7 years old, and when they are created in an abnormal way, abandonment syndrome, your whole life will be dictated by these behavioral injunctions. For example, you're afraid of being abandoned, well, all your life you will give up so you won't be abandoned. Because when faced with a behavioral injunction, there are only 2 possibilities. To submit to it or to oppose it. There is no other way. We can sometimes negotiate, but negotiation, we observe it especially in conflicts, which I called the little devils at the time. I gave the stones that corresponded to evacuate these primary behavioral patterns. That's what the psychologists whose names I mentioned, Aaron Beck and Jeffrey Young, will call the early functional patterns. Remember that it is a programming of the operating system that cannot be made to disappear, hence the illusion of all the therapies that want you to believe that by working on your memories, on your past, on your karma, you'll suppress things. It is a heresy, and it is not a heresy related to perception, it is a heresy that is written in the brain. Today, it is perfectly demonstrated, which is why neuroscience is very violently opposed to psychoanalysis and psychotherapies, because you do not solve anything, indeed, in the past, whatever you feel in the moment. It's a total scam. Of course, there are other layers, unfortunately. The second layer that appears is, therefore, shallower. That's what I called it, that's what I invented, that's what I invented, the behavioral fingerprint model, that is, how you experienced your first encounter with the great archetypes. What is the first archetype? It is one of abandonment and suffering. You go from one state to another. Fertilization of the mother, the soul enters the body and it is locked in the body of the mother, and there is forgetting at the moment of birth. You know that we have forgotten what we were before, that is the fundamental wound. However, just now I took the example of the abandonment wound, related to the child who cries in his bed or feels abandoned by the parents. Your whole life will be marked by this and you can do nothing about it, because it is an operating system that is set in stone. We can only add our layer on top of it, in different ways, crystals, reprogramming, but this is not a work on the past, even if we seek what we call it, in cognitive therapies. This is the school in AYOUN. We talk about cognitive slavery, we talk about the founding myth, we talk about a live scenario. We can only put another layer back on the programming system so that it is less functional, again, in different ways, with different possibilities. The second layer, then, the behavioral imprints, is the archetypes, dad, mom, family, partner, the two-way relationship, the relationship with the other. But when you are in bed, the relationship between two people beyond dad, mom, it is who the other one is, it is the cuddly toy, it is the pacifier, or it is the brother and sister. These behavioral imprints, there are a certain number of them. If I had the schema, it would help me. Know that we identified a little over 20 of them and I named them. It is the father's imprint, the mother's imprint, the transgenerational imprint which also goes through DNA. It is, above all, these systems. Don't forget that everything I am saying here will be presented on a model of a pyramid, a triangle, and that I'll show you that we can place all these regulation systems. By having the visual you will understand how your behavior, your injuries, your current experience are articulated, not to identify you in one of the models. That's why I'm not giving you the AT, but simply, when you see how it works, you understand that we are only an automaton. We know very well, for example, I talked about the decisioning. These days, I told you, you decide to buy a car, you think you decided. It's not true, it's your bacteria that decide, that are in the stomach, fourth brain, and it's not you. You say, I'm a sugar addict, it's not you, it's your bacteria in your stomach. You have this behavior, you say it's you. No, it's the behavioral injunctions you don't have access to because it's a programming system, it's the operating system, and you can oppose it in any way you can. You can only suffer, even if you eliminate it from your head. I told you a few days ago, it's going to disappear into the body and you won't have any way to make the connection. Now we know, with neuroscience, someone who is going to do psychotherapy because they have had problems with their father, a woman who has been raped by their father or abused by their father, she will work on these wounds, these memories, these emotions. She's going to be happy because it got out of her head. She's going to say, that's it, I'm free of it. Yes, but it goes down into the body, great principle of the descent of vibrations from the emotional into the body, and that's where diseases appear, and there's nothing you can do about it. This second layer of behavioral imprints, so, there are several, I expect to have it. There is also one of the fundamental ones called the refusal of incarnation. The refusal of incarnation is the one that comes into the womb of the mother, the two sons of the soul, at the moment of fertilization by the sperm, and which at the moment of gestation says, I'm afraid. Withdrawal of the soul, on the other hand, the mother says, I don't want this child, it's over. No reception, refusal of incarnation which will result in a certain number of specific circumstances during childbirth. I will not go into details, but circular of the cord around the neck, abnormal presentation, extremely difficult childbirth that will induce very particular wounds in adulthood, someone who never manages to find his place in the universe and in himself. He is always wandering, nothing is ever perfect, he doesn't know where he is, he doesn't know who he is, it's the most serious injury, it's the deepest. Just after that, since they're in the behavioral imprints, which is the second layer, which is linked to incarnation and learning, you obviously have the transgenerational. Then, just above, you have the father, the archetype dad, the archetype mom, just above. And when I have the triangle, I hope to have it one day, you'll see clearly on this diagram where these regulations are located and how they interact, because they are all an interaction. Again, it's not for you to understand yourself. Without that, I would give you a course on the 81 temperaments, but that's not the point. But when you see how things are articulated, you understand that you are none of these things and that you can do nothing about it, especially. So this second layer, then there are other impressions, the impression of mourning, of course, the throat-chakra, the so-called impression of self-confidence, guilt, devalorization. All these behavioral imprints of the second layer, they are linked to learning, they are also constitutional, because they are also linked to the first layer, but it is, above all, what will happen between 0, I say 7 years, Rufo said between 0 and 4 years, Rufo, the neurochild psychiatrist who takes care of children in Marseille, has perfectly demonstrated this. As you are in this second layer, remember that what you experienced in what is called the founding myth, is the scenario you wrote. It is your story. This founding myth is a scenario. There is always, and that's what cognitive therapies are based on, what is called a founding myth. The founding myth is the first evolution, the first video sequence, the first emotional coloration when you have been confronted with the archetype, dad, mom, transgenerational, partner, home, what is called the home, which is illustrated on the areas of the body, of course, not only in the brain. For example, we know very well, partner conflict corresponds to the thoracic floor. The partner is the relationship with the other, the relationship with two. Often, in the couple, it is, of course, linked to all breast cancers, but you also have the home. It is no longer the relationship of two, there is the relationship in the couple. It is the imprints that are active all our lives, which are responsible for lung cancer and breast cancer. So on the left, it's the partner, a two-person relationship. On the right, it's the home, other footprints. It is also a given neurotransmitter, because on my pyramidal model, the lower level, reptilian, of course, is the attitude towards the challenge. The whole reptilian stage is located in the lower body, what Steiner called the tripartition of the human being, the bottom, the middle and the top. It's as simple as that. And when one level is affected, whether it is in the emotional relationship, for example, you see the other, he has a problem of deficiency or excess, of emotional lack, you see the ball and you know what is behind it. It's not vision, it's not energy, and since it's imprinted in the body, on the territories of the body, it's very easy to determine the typology of the person, not to categorize it, because there's no question of categorizing, even if we do it with the system I created in Neuroscience, the biophysical measurement system. Just understanding that, seeing it, allows you to be transcendent in relation to yourself, especially now. You have no means of action, everything you think you're doing only strengthens itself, the only possibility, as I say, to try to cross, to welcome, to see things in your life, that your life is the illustration of this meta model of regulation of living systems. So, we still don't have my little schematics. Sister. She tells me that the password is blank. I will try to make it with the hidden file. I've uploaded into this one, transferred all the files. So without that, it's very simple. This meta model of regulation, you visualize it, you have a pyramid, first regulation, 3 levels, the upper part of the pyramid, the head, the middle part of the pyramid, lingual stage, the middle brain, the thorax, reptilian stage, everything below the diaphragm, up to the feet. So it leads to a classification. Someone who has a problem with his right leg, whether it is a sciatica or a circulatory problem, he has a problem with the lower territory, so on the reptilian brain, he has fattened, since it is the right side, with the father, it will result, through these potentials, in a deficit of the keka that goes through there, combativity, will, it will result in an emotional inability to turn to the other, a distrust. It will be reflected in the interface, the transactional level, by someone who will be rather shy, who will have such a temperament, who will be very suspicious, who will have difficulty moving forward because he is crystallized in the reptilian brain. And with this simple image, this simple representation, even if we don't have the drawing, you understand, there is no question of showing you everything, but that's just how a human being works and you can't avoid it. So of course, cognitive therapies, crystals, for example, with early functional patterns, allow either with crystals to put a programming layer on the famous initial disorder, the famous little devils as I named them, the famous early functional patterns of Jeffrey Young, but without playing you, because cognitive therapies replay you, they seek the founding myth, which led to the crystallization and construction of neural networks, which destroyed the operating system, and they put a layer on top. The crystals sweep it all away. It's all the little devils that people made when they used the stones around their bodies or around their feet. Sister, it erases the information. What? Sister, it erases the information. You can't erase it, that's the mistake. You can only reprogram, you can't make anything disappear from what you've experienced. It's mathematically, neuroscientifically impossible. That's why the myth, the whole thing, it's all bullshit. You eliminate it from your head, from your emotions, in your body, never anywhere else, and as you have no way of checking it, it usually takes about 10 years, even 15, 20 years, to appear. Who is going to make the link between a conflict of territory and cancer, and a psychological, psychotherapeutic or energetic analysis work that was done 20 years later? No one is. It's impossible. There's only neuroscience, not even clean, because I also wanted to show you clean images. It's not even energy that shows you that. It is the neurosciences through the theory of the complaint that is very simple. Everything you would pose is strengthened. Everything you were going to try to solve will be resolved in your head, in your emotions, but it will come down into your body every time. Systematically. That's why there is more and more violence in the neuroscientific field, which has taken psychoanalysis and some psychologies out of universities, because it has nothing to do with it. Freud is the biggest scam of the last century. It is he who brought humanity to. So you can tell me what you want, people can tell you what you want, they can refute all that, call me all the names, but I'm sorry, but that's how the brain works and there's nothing you can do about it. All you are opposed to will be strengthened and led to an organic disease. Is Dr. Hem's integral medicine, which has been so much trouble because he has shown that when there is a conflict of territory of behavioral imprints, there is cancer on the organ, and there is the area of the brain in the hologram of the brain that is also affected by cerebral edema. We know that someone who has a conflict, breast cancer, will have in the area of the brain that corresponds to cerebral edema, and moreover, they treated cerebral edema with cortisone to neutralize this memory. That's the clean effect, but it's not my model. That's all I transferred from the computer to my USB stick that I gave you after checking. So either not one of the passwords that's there, or I don't know. So if you want to... Sister, I have a question to ask. Today, all this is amply demonstrated. Whatever the human being thinks, whatever psychologists or psychiatrists or psychotherapists think, they are all wrong. Yes. Sister, what about kinesiology? A complete lie. Sister. Same. I'm not making any friends right now. You are working on the condition, kinesiology. I know what it is. Engrams, memories. We cross off the engram, you will feel good, of course, but 10 years later, we will talk about it again. Sister. Same. Same here. Sister. Because. Same here. Sister. Okay. Same thing, it goes down into the body. There's nothing you can do about it. And if we are now talking about esotericism, we have the auras, the different subtle bodies, and we know very well, Jean Fontaine spoke about it some 30 years ago already in energetic medicine of the three bodies. We know very well that when you go to act on a level, everyone thinks that it is evacuated. The body is the dump of your emotions, the body is the dump of your problems. Brother, we put the dust under the carpet. That's it, that's all you do. Brother, yes, exactly. That's all you do, but today, there are no more carpets. As Grandpa said, you can't hide the dust anymore. You can only be in denial. But again, it's something that's systematic. Systematic. It didn't seem like it, but with the evidence we have, it's very clear. You have no possibility of solving your story. You solve it on one plane, it appears on another plane, and the plane where it will appear will be more and more dense, passes from the mind to emotions, from the mind to the etheric, and from the etheric to the body, and the etheric, the organic manifestation, refers to the whole logical chain through this system that I explained to you there, briefly, will refer you to that. It's unstoppable. It's unstoppable, there's nothing you can do about it. This means that today, especially now with the end of the primary anomaly, wanting to work on his emotions, wanting to work on his memories, on his karma, or wanting to work on a present problem, can only lead to a reinforcement that you will not be able to see, but which will descend into the physical body, and the organs that will be affected are, of course, linked to Dr. Hem's territorial conflict. So, whether it is a cancer or a degenerative disease, or at least a problem, and it is when you drop all that, when you no longer interact with the environment, that all diseases disappear, that everything that was suffering disappears. Society, through the images that are printed where, in the neocortex at the occipital level, only locks you up. The image is a trap, the representation is a trap, symbolism is nothing more than disguised diabolism. Moreover, symbol and diabolical, etymologically, it means the same thing, it is the two sides of the same room. Sister. So, the symbol, confinement. It's the confinement, of course, all these form waves. Moreover, the acontic matrix confinement on Earth is linked to what? To the monuments. Notre Dame, all acontic grids are linked to what are called form waves, that is, what is called the system of control of the human mind. Do not go through an action or the devil who will say you will do this. It is enough to build buildings with precise shapes called form effect waves, to lock up what is called the flower of life. Everyone from Drunvalo Melchizedek uses it, is a luciferic system enclosing, like the all therapies are essentially luciferic in nature. We had only that before, but now we have had proof at the neurosciences level. Now we have proof at the level of our own experience. Diseases disappear or get worse and you can do nothing about it. That's why we're talking about an observer. That's why I'm now explaining to you on a purely dense, physical level, what's happening in every brain and every human body. There's no need for particularism. We know that there are 80 temperaments, 81, I can tell you that you're a heroic climber, you're a hypochondriac, you're an emotional, but it will not change anything. You have the seducers too, that's very strong, but when we did the PM assessments like that in the living room at the beginning of the system, we sometimes made torque measurements. It's very funny, the torque measurements. We did it with the Klein effect. You know, we talk about the symbolic level of chemistry. Well, we used to take the husband's finger, the wife's finger like that, and we took a Klein picture of the two index fingers face to face. We saw what was happening. 90 times out of 100, there is always a dominant and dominated, and it is not always the one we believe. It is the one who overlaps the radiance of the other by these chemistry atoms and eats his radiance. Even in the most harmonious relationships, there is never a balance. You also have something that is very frequent. You put both fingers of the husband and the wife, the two working partners. No matter how it works, the same way it is the relationship between two, the rays move away from each other completely. There is no hooked atom, but there is an indifference. But overall, remember that balance in the living does not exist. As we have demonstrated in Klein, the only time when your energy is balanced is when you are dead. Since we went as far as Morgs to make Klein effects of hands and feet on dead people, and there, we realized that they were perfect balance. As soon as you interact with the living, you're out of balance. This is the inexorable law of this world. Imbalance necessarily leads to death. Anyway, we all die, and to disease. That's why individuality is a total scam. To believe that you will change anything in yourself is a total scam. Of course, there are times when we have to act, we have to operate, we have to go to the emergency room, but in the long term and on the global vision, all this is an integral pipework. When you see that, when you accept that, because you experience it, we all experience it today, you're free. Brother. But yes. That is what it means to remain calm, that is what it means to welcome life rather than to be its life, because its life is marked by these engrams, by this constitution, by these interactions with the environment, by conflicts over territory, by changes, the ego or personality, the mask that you wear in relationships. And there is no possibility of being free in there. We have all been trapped for 300,000 years, not only in this cycle. And all this is real, all this is real. So there, you have the illustrations, but it's the Klein effect. It's perhaps not the time. I'll show it to you one evening if you want. We obviously did it before we had Neuroscience, because I was working with the greatest of the Klein effect. They were my associates at the time, Georges and Herv Muscovacius, one of whom allowed me to develop the system of neuroscience measurements. These ones, I can't give them to you because they are not free of rights. Here we go. So we had a lot of experience with crystals. I told you about the Baker Poilini. For example, I told you that someone who is stressed and who is going to need the dough will transmit his stress in the bread, and we too are carrying permanent information without our knowledge voluntarily in social interactions, even without going through the verbal, through the eyes or otherwise. You have energy signals that are exchanged between human beings. Moreover, we are talking about pheromones. Sister. Yes, that's right. Same thing, it's the same thing. You don't feel them, yet they're active. As soon as you interact with someone, beyond any understanding, beyond any aesthetic aspect, there are antipathies and sympathies that are made that do not depend at all on reason, logic, or a need for compensation for anything. It is automatic. Why, for example, victims of sexual abuse by the father will always meet men who will beat them. It is a vibratory affinity. The lack answers the same thing. Sister. It's like battered women. Exactly. Like alcohol problems, like all the problems we've seen in psychology. So we know that, but the solution is not in there. We never treat a problem where it is located. We knew that. For me, who treated the chakras with crystals, we know that the chakras are connected 2 by 2. Someone who has a second chakra blocked, I will not treat the second chakra first. I will treat the chakra that is linked, that is, the throat capital of accumulated. However, in quantum medicine, we never treat a problem at the level where it is located. But what are all these quantum therapies doing right now, so to speak? They treat at the level where it is located. They treat with frequencies. For example, it's a heresy. Because everything you're going to oppose to, internally, but not something external, will become stronger, and especially if it goes well right away. That's what's dramatic. It's that you have no possibility to see it. We're trapped. This is the confinement of the reptilian brain that is the seat of individuality, and all these systems of regulation of living systems loop around, regulating themselves whatever you think and whatever you say. Simply showing it today, not to know yourself but to see how it works, instantly allows you to get out of the trap. Everyone knows that. You have had a problem, for example, with a child who has been a victim of pedophilia, can only reproduce what he or she has experienced and cannot escape, because it is unconscious programming in the deepest part of the brain that dictates behavior by behavioral injection. I took the very simple examples, but I'm not talking about functional patterns. The most important ones, Jeffrey Young identified 49, I kept 23 in my measurement system, but you will see, for example, I will take a very simple example. You have something that is stupid. You have a behavioral injunction from your mother that says when you come home from school, wash your hands, wash your hands. It gets so engrossing in your brain, that's what it's engrammed. And if you have the pattern in relation to cleanliness, what will happen to your hands? Either you submit to the scheme and wash your hands all the time, or you negotiate with the mother's behavioral injunction and you say, do I wash my hands or not? And either you become phobic, that is, you refuse the scheme, and then what are you going to do? You're not going to touch anything anymore, so you don't have to dirty your hands. Psychologically, it works exactly the same way. So I would have liked to have the diagram, but I think that right now, sister, the place, the environment around you, the surroundings, still influences your behavior. Of course, the atmosphere, are you talking about today? Sister, the environment. From the founding myth, from the child's experience. Sister, changes its behavior too, it changes to, this behavior. What atmosphere are you talking about, today or the past? Sister, the environment in which you are, surroundings, environmental, yes, from the past. But look at the bullshit. For example, a woman who has had a problem with violence or abuse of authority or sexual abuse by the father, she will always come across violent men, because it is unwittingly, you can do nothing about it, so you can change the scene, go live in nature, but as soon as you meet her, she'll always be subject to that. It's the law of attraction, but seen differently. The law of attraction. You think you're going to attract the opposite by thinking the other way around or something. It's not true. It cannot work because what you convey through energy, through pheromones, but also through your face, through your presentation. There is also a psychological aptitude called dysthymia, which is the ability to recognize non-verbal signals. A human being has a certain number of muscles on his face: anger, tears, sorrow, joy. Whether it is in the Papuans of New Guinea or in the New Yorkers, it is the same muscles that are used: surprise, fear, and everything that is imprinted on his face. But we all have this ability no matter what the person tells you, even if we don't take it into account, what we feel. Our brain records the face that the other person shows you, it's the image. But programming is done through images. That's what the media do. They talk to you about films, they show you scenarios, Hollywood films, predilection, and so many others, which are just what's happening. Since today, For example, we see it today. The arrow of the falling cathedral at Paris had always been represented, not always, since a famous illuminated cartoon and even Victor Hugo spoke about it. Do you think it is said that he was a visionary? No, it was written, and it is precisely by seeing this simulacrum, this player's bidder says, that you, at some point, can only laugh at it and you are no longer submissive, your character. So, whether we take it by the crystals, as I said, by the belly dance, by the predictions of so many others, by explanations, by anything, we always achieve the same result today. Today, it is as if everything I had studied, which is no longer useful today, on neuroscience, on energy, on psychology, is simply a support point that will come to insist, which is the demonstration of how it works, not for you, but for every human being. Sister. Rational demonstration. Yes. Brother. Seeing it. Yes, accept to see, not to understand, let things happen and you can only go through them. Brother. That's it, since it's inevitable. What the hell is that? Brother. It is not the Muslims who say, it was written, it is not that they say too, it is destiny. Yes, of course. Brother. So that's in line with what you... That's what I'm telling you, creation, the whole creation, not this world, is a dream. It never existed. When we use the expression dream, it is obviously in relation to the total similarity between the moment when you are awake and the moment when you only sleep. It is the same thing. It doesn't exist, you don't exist. Brother. So we suffer. Yes, you follow a dream, timeliness, space lines, there is only one particle in creation that has made all the possible parts, that occurred at what is called the initial moment, the Spirit of God was floating on the waters. Well, if you want, whatever, take it as you want, but all that doesn't exist, it's a vast scam. Consciousness, as Bhatti said, is a disease. Brother. As you said earlier, you took that example, a woman who was abused in her childhood, afterwards, will regularly meet violent men too. Also. Brother. Well, can't we say she likes it? Not at all, on the contrary, it is opposed to it, everything you oppose is strengthened. Brother. She is attracted. That's what traps you when you've lived in learning. A founding myth had something functional. I told you, it was a programming system, it's an operating system, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, you can't avoid it. Of course, the ego will rebel by saying I will understand, I will erase this memory, I will go into my past, I will forgive. Brother. It doesn't work. Sister. It's the ego. You are locked in, we are locked in, even in our structures, even subtle ones. Look, we are talking about the etheric body, the astral body, the mental body and the causal body. But beyond the causal body, there is something else, as we already know, that we call the germ atom, the spiritual atom, the Eggman, the Brahman, the red drop, the white drop of the Tibetans, and yet, we continue. Because it was not possible to live before. The causal layer is what? It is the Van Allen belt that locked us up. It was lower, the system of control of the human mind, which was controlled by behavioral injunctions linked to the image and also to buildings. It is a binary acontic mesh, it is a binary matrix. As they say, matrix is not a film, it is a documentary, it is the strict truth. And it goes much further than that because all the planes manifested, even the closest to home, are part of the dream, they are already in us. That's all bullshit, and when you say you have to wake up, that's it. And today, since the simulacrum is confused with the sacred wherever you look in yourself, outside, on the world stage, in the interactions of the world, you can only reach this conclusion, it is inexorable. As Bhatti said, what happens is not eternal. Well, I have also said it so many times, but here, we have the explanations, but the explanations are not enough. We live it at all levels, so? Sister, this is not complicated. Brother, yes, it is complicated, because here I am using the example of earlier, the woman who regularly finds someone. Yes. Brother, what it means, we will tell her accept. Yes, today. Sister, you have no choice, you no longer have a choice. But that doesn't mean she'll accept it. Brother, be in love. No, if you're in Agape love, you are zero time, you no longer even have to say accept, you take her hand and say nothing, and she will be healed. That's the miracle. I can see this in everything that happens every day, since hundreds of treatments are asked of me. It is the truth, all the engrams are swept away. That is to say, the programming system of the central nucleus is the end of the dream of immortality, it is the end of the myth of immortality, it is the end of what Anza called the skin self, it is considered to be me and the limit of my body is my identity. You have no identity, it's a dream. To be continued. Through Jean-Luc Young. Les Transformations. Transcription from French. Agape. English translation. LMF.